All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be talking about oil. I want to make this hopefully the last video on oil that you guys need to watch if you're trying to make this decision. I know there's just so much information and so many opinions out there, and I want to really use this video to give you guys the information I have so that you can make this decision for yourself. I have multiple cars with the B58 engine. I'm pushing over 600 horsepower. I take it to track duty. I daily drive it in the winter and in the summer. And so, of course, it's really important for me to use a high quality oil that I can rely on. And so in this video, I'm going to, again, just give you a lot more information on what makes oils in our engine unique and how you can pick the right oil for your car and why I have decided to switch all of my cars over to 0W30 because I consider that to be the best recommendation for a daily driven kind of mixed use vehicle. So we'll talk about all that and more in this video, and hopefully you find it useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. Now, to start off, let's cover the basics. So the first thing we'll talk about is what the numbers on our oil mean. For example, in this video, we're going to reference 0W30. So that first number, 0W, represents how the oil performs when it's cold. 0W means that it has really good cold start protection and it can even lubricate the engine at very low temperatures. As that number gets higher, it's going to give you less cold start protection. So it's only going to have an adequate viscosity in warmer temperatures. Now this goes to extremely low temperatures as far as the testing goes. And keep in mind, this is an SAE standard. This is something that anybody can look up. If you Google J300, you can see all of the charts and data for how these requirements are met. But 0W can protect your car down to -40°C in certain scenarios. So extremely cold temperatures that most of us don't experience, but even in warmer temperatures, it will give you better cold start protection. Now, if you guys are curious how this is tested, they basically cool down the oil to an extremely low temperature, and then they put a little piece of tooling down into the oil and they spin it. And they're basically trying to measure the resistance of that tool spinning in the oil. Now, if the oil is thicker, there's going to be more resistance, and they can actually calculate that. And based on the readings that they get, they can assign it to a number on that table. So the minimum number has to be met, and that's what it's going to get assigned to. So for example, there are multiple options on there for 0W, 5W, 10W. If it meets the requirements for 5W and 10W, but it doesn't meet the requirement for 0W, then that will be considered a 5W oil. So there are these kind of ranges that it has to fall into in order for it to meet a certain rating requirement. Now, the second number represents how the oil performs at operating temperature. So if we're looking at the example of 0W30, now we're looking at the 30 number. Now, this is measured by taking the oil at 100 degrees Celsius or just over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and they basically force that oil through a hole. The hole is at a set standard diameter based on the same SAE spec, and the amount of time that it takes for that oil to go through the hole is what determines what actual viscosity rating it will reach. So again, they have multiple different ones, 20, 30, 40, 50, and depending on how long it takes to go through that hole, they'll basically put it on that chart and land it in the range where it is performing. Now, keep in mind, both of these scales are measured very differently, so that means there's no correlation between the two. And that's a really common misconception and something that I've even incorrectly said in the past. You know, for example, if you had a 20W20 oil, that 20W rating and the way that that oil performs when it's cold is not the exact same as the 20 rating on the hot side. It's not an oil that's just completely consistent. You can actually see, here's an example of how different oils perform when they're cold versus when they're hot. And so you can see on the left side of the chart, there's a huge amount of variation as you go from 0W to 5W to 10W, all the way up to the static 40 weight oil. But as it goes towards the right, they become much more consistent. There's there's much less variation. And even the highest viscosity, 50 weight oil is not as thick as, a 0 weight cold oil. So that is something just, again, to consider. No matter what, as oil warms up, it's going to get thinner, and there's not a direct correlation between those two numbers. Now, above and beyond just the weights of an oil, there are additional specifications that a manufacturer can assign to an engine in order to make sure that it's meeting its lubrication requirements. So in BMW world, they have several oil specs. They call them LL specs, and they're just various variation of long life dash and then a number. So on our B58s, the specification is LL01FE or LL14FE+. And this varies, again, depending on region. Some of you guys in Europe have slightly different specs for your emissions requirements and things like that. And that's because the additives that meet those specs will have different effects on your emission system and other components that are in your car. So definitely just check out your user manual. It will tell you the requirements for the oil that you need to use, and it will also tell you additional variations of oil that you can use if you can't find the actual LL01FE or LL14FE spec oil that's designed for your car. You can also see that it specifies that 0W20 or 0W30 oil is supposed to be used, but there are additional options that you can use if you're in a pinch and you don't have 0W20 or 0W30 available. Now, one other thing I want to specify as far as the BMW spec, I see a lot of people saying the specification doesn't matter because all you do is just pay for it and then you can slap that label on your car. And that is true and false. It's true in the sense that, yes, a lot of manufacturers pay in order to get that certification on their oil, but they still have to make sure that the oil meets requirements in order for it to meet that spec. So, for example, this is the 0W30 oil that I am using in my car now. This is a Liqui Moly 0W30 Special Tech, but if you look up 0W30 options on Liqui Moly's website, there are multiple and all of them do not meet the LL01FE specification. So you specifically want to look for it to actually say BMW Long Life 01FE to make sure that it meets the specification for your BMW. Some of the other formulations like Top Tech and things like that have different additives that are maybe designed for diesel cars or other engines that don't have the same lubrication requirements as the B58. So that's why I like to make sure that I'm sticking with an oil that meets their specification. Yes, there could be oils out there from companies that didn't want to pay for the certification, but it still meets the same requirements. But this just makes it easy to know for sure that it's going to be an adequate oil for your setup. So now the real question, why am I running 0W30? Why do I think it's the best? And if you guys have seen my previous videos, you'll know that I've had 0W20. I ran that for years. Then I tried 5W40, then I tried 5W30, and most recently I've switched to 0W30. And the reason is pretty simple. I mean, the same reason why BMW wants to run 0W20 is the same reason why I like to run 0W30. For one, 0W gives you really good cold start protection. And especially now that I've been driving my car in winter, I find that it takes an extremely long time to warm up 5-weight oil. That's not something that I experienced with 0W20 at all. I will say that 0W30 takes slightly longer than 0W20 to warm up, but what's most important to me is spending the most time possible at operating temperature. Something you guys might notice, especially in the winter, is not only does it take longer to warm up, but there's more smoke coming out of the car because there's more condensation, and it just takes longer to get all of that water evaporated out of your PCV system. Thus, what happens is that you end up taking a lot of trips that don't completely evaporate the water out of your oil, and if you open up your oil cap, you'll see like this white kind of milky residue. That's water that hasn't completely evaporated out of your oiling system. So that's something that you really want to avoid. That's another reason why we recommend not taking short trips. You really want to get your engine up to temperature and drive for at least 15 to 20 minutes at a time if possible to burn off all of that, water and potential gases that could just be sitting in your oil and contaminating it over time. This is actually one of the first winters where I was really daily driving my car, not just driving it a couple times. And it started getting frustrating, especially when temps got down to the single digits. And I would actually stay in the parking lot when I got to work or when I got home and just let the car run for a couple minutes, just again, to keep the engine up to temperature for longer and try to get rid of all of that moisture in the oil. And that's just something that I really don't want to deal with. So now that I'm running 0W30, the engine warms up quicker and it's spends more time at operating temperature when I'm on my regular commute, which is a win-win for me. The other thing is better protection on cold start, which again, even in the warmer temperatures where it's not negative 40 C or negative 30 C outside where they're testing it at the limit, it's still going to give you better cold start protection. Your oil is going to pump more quickly. It's going to get all of those critical components more quickly, and you're going to build up oil pressure faster. So when you get that cold start going and your car is basically at its most risky scenario, this is going to give you the most protection possible. So again, that's the exact thing that you would want for any engine that you care about. I think 0W is perfect in that regard. Now, the last thing is, of course, it gives you better fuel economy. When you first start up your car and you're driving around, your car is wasting a lot of fuel. It's basically at its least efficient state. And so getting better fuel economy while the car is warming up is a nice thing to have, especially for those of us that are running E85 and things like that. It just helps you get back some of that efficiency. Now, once the engine gets up to temperature, 30 weight gives you good protection as well. That 0W20 or 0W30 recommendation gives you two options that they designed the engine to run. So 30 is on the high side of that spec. And like I said, I race my cars, I track my cars, and I want to make sure that I have the most protection possible. So I think running the 30 weight oil works great. I've tracked it all last year and I had no issues. I didn't have any problems with, spun bearings. Somebody said that I was going to spin a rod bearing and all this stuff. I had no problems, so thankfully that has been working great in my experience. The other thing compared to 5W40 oil, for example, is you're going to have better fuel efficiency and just overall a faster rotating engine. Keep in mind, lower viscosity oils will produce less rolling resistance. And when a lot of people are trying to calculate things like engine horsepower versus wheel horsepower, this is something that can improve the efficiency of your engine, so you actually translate more torque and then more power to your wheels. So by running a 30 weight oil instead of a 40 weight oil, I'm actually increasing the efficiency of my car, which not only gives me better gas mileage, but helps the car put down more power to the road. So yeah, all of those things are good and well, but let's talk about some other things. One, of course, is just oil change requirements. And this is something where I think it's really important for you guys to stay on top of your oil changes. People are concerned because 0W20 or 0W30 will break down more quickly. And my response to that is, if you think it's breaking down more quickly, then just change your oil more often. BMW actually already tries to compensate for this for you. You can see when I reset my oil change timer, I had put about 4,000 miles on the car since my last oil change, and it was estimating another 4,500 before I do my next one. And this is automatically adjusted based on your driving style. So a lot of people have told me when they reset it, they see 8,000, sometimes maybe even 7,000 miles to their next oil change. So if you're driving your car hard, it's automatically going to put that into its calculation, and it's not just going to assume 10,000 mile oil changes no matter what. So if you're really breaking down your oil and beating on your car hard throughout the year, you should be changing your oil more frequently. Running a thicker oil isn't going to fix that because that oil will just break down more quickly as well. Then the other thing that I hear is, well, you need to run thicker oil because your car is tuned, because you're making more power and it's creating more heat. And I want to remind you guys that these viscosity ratings are based on oil temperature, not ambient temperature, not, any aspect of IETs or anything like that. Is based on oil temperature. Yes, the first number, of course, does have to do with ambient temperature because the temperature outside is going to match your oil temperature if the car has been cold for long enough. But if you're driving your car in 0 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, your oil temperature is going to be the same once the engine gets up to operating temp. And I challenge anybody out there that has data logging software to do the same thing that I did. Run your car stock, run some logs, tune it, run some logs, flash E40, put on a big turbo, whatever you want, and compare your oil temperature before and after while you're doing pulls and driving your car. My car has not had any excessive variation. Oil temperatures still stay completely consistent. A lot of that has to do with the B58 engine. Some of us have up to 4 different radiators plus an additional oil cooler on our car to keep everything under control. And it's just not the same like things were 20 plus years ago. Our cars run very efficiently. They keep their temps very consistent. And so again, just because your car is tuned, just because you have a big turbo setup, it doesn't innately mean that your oil is absorbing and creating all of this extra heat. I guarantee you that your oil is going to still be relatively consistent. And if it's not, if you're pushing a super high horsepower setup or you're just pushing your car way harder than I am, I highly recommend improving your oil cooling system instead of just running a thicker oil. You really just want the oil temps to be under control regardless. A lot of people run max cooling mode and stuff to help reduce their oil temps. And I've seen people get their oil down to like the high 100s, like 180 to 190 degrees. That's a little bit cold for my taste, but some of you might like seeing it in that range. So again, a lot of different options to reduce your oil temps if that's actually a concern and an issue that you're having. But for my cars, again, daily driving it, doing track days, street racing, whatever, I have not had any issues with excessive oil temp that would indicate I would need a thicker oil or that I need to improve my oil cooling system. Now, the last thing, of course, is oil consumption. And this is especially for my TU guys. A lot of you are experiencing oil consumption and you say that switching to 5W30 or 5W40 fixed it. Now, congratulations, you were able to, correct the issue that BMW let out the door. But at the end of the day, that's not inherently an oil issue. That is an engine issue. That's a manufacturing problem. And this is something that German cars have been dealing with for years. Even back in my Volkswagen Audi days, I was seeing cars getting piston rings replaced, getting engines replaced, all these different things that were causing oil consumption. So again, it's not an oil issue. If you're consuming oil, it's going somewhere, and running a thicker oil might compensate for it. But I would still be concerned that there is a gap, a leak, something that should be tighter and running better. And a lot of people that aren't experiencing oil consumption and have a tighter engine will experience the best results with the recommended oil. Now, as always, getting your own data is really the best thing that you can do for yourself. So get a sample of your oil and send it out for an oil analysis. I send my oil out to Blackstone. Unfortunately, this most recent oil change isn't going to be too helpful because I lost so much oil when I was replacing my cams and stupid issues that I created during that process, that this has like 2 or 2.5 liters of extra fresh oil that I haven't had for the duration of my year. So this is not going to be super valid, but I still plan on getting that data just for peace of mind. But if you send that oil in, you can get good understanding of your wear patterns, how your oil is holding up, if your oil change intervals are on track, if you can increase them or decrease them. It's just a good way to get an actual recommendation based on your car, your driving style, your conditions, everything that's unique to you. Because again, blanket statements from somebody like me can give you a good starting point, but nothing will beat getting your own information to make that decision for yourself. So yeah, hopefully this video isn't too overwhelming. I just kind of wanted to share all the information that I have and explain why I recommend 0W30 oil to everybody. These modern cars are not the same as old cars. I know a lot of people get a lot of heartburn when they see 0W20 and they're like, no way this will work. And you guys are in for a surprise when the B58 TU2 becomes mainstream. We'll tackle that when it happens. But in the meantime, there are just a lot of things that you need to consider, and you can't just apply, your old thinking to these new engines. Again, the cooling is better, the heat management is better, the oiling is way better. This is something that is just going to depend on a lot of different things. Everybody has different goals and different ways that they drive their car, and there's nothing wrong with running different oils than I do. At the end of the day, none of my oils have caused issues. I've never had a problem with my car. But I feel like 0W30 is the best of both worlds to give you good protection, get your car up to temp and running efficiently as possible while still making sure that everything stays together. So if you guys have any other experiences, definitely feel free to reach out to me and let me know your thoughts. And yeah, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.